Hello, people of the internet. Welcome to another edition of the Shuwatch podcast. I am, of course, your host, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and here with me today, my guest is, for the first time on the show, a nonfiction writer. You may know him from several books concerning detailing, categorizing, and recording the history of giant monster movies, and is currently making a new book, or has recently released a new book covering lost films, or films that were never made in the Japanese giant monster subgenre of science fiction. Give it up for Mr. John LeMay.
Hey Andres, thanks for having me on. I have to say I enjoy your Kaiju Noir reviews from time to time.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very happy to hear that you've been enjoying the stuff I put out there.
Because I have to say, you have seen a lot of really hard to track down films. I was impressed because I had never ever gotten to see Deep Sea Monster Rygo, or however you say it, and I think I had to listen to your review to kind of get a sense of it, so I could talk about it in one of my books. So I think that's how I discovered you.
Oh, thank you very much. I feel incredibly honored. Although I do have to apologize for that. You have to sit through a lot of my old work where I wasn't as experienced and my voice was kind of flat and kind of like a little bit awkward in front of the microphone back in 2012. But I'm still glad that you enjoyed the review regardless. And when I first started, sorry to talk about starting off this interview talking about me, but in terms of tracking down those films, I mostly relied on a particular bootleg website. I have mentioned it a bit in the past, but after this podcast, I could point you in the right direction. And if you'd like, I actually have digital copies of a lot of those films that I reviewed, a lot of those early obscure indie movies I have back in the day that I can send them to you your way via email.
Oh, I would love that. There's some of those I've been dying to see for years, and I'm someone who has, if there's an official release of something, I'll buy it.
Oh yeah,
to
totally.
Support the creator. But I mean, if there's not an official release, I mean, what are you gonna do?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it wasn't until recently where we really got a hand on a lot of stuff that we've been meaning to add to our collection of tokusatsu media. Recently we got Shout Factory has been able to help us out with Ultra Q, Ultra 7, and a lot of the Sentai stuff. Several other companies like Kraken has been putting out Godzilla movies. I think it was like Miramax, Anchor Bay, and then later Miramax, I think. They put out Godzilla vs. Biollante, and let's see, who was it that put out Godzilla 84?
That was Kraken as well.
Ah, okay, yeah. But yeah, a good 5-6 years ago, it was pretty hard to get any of that stuff, and even still, it's still pretty difficult to find a lot of the more more obscure stuff that isn't Godzilla, Gamera, or King Kong. So, I guess to start things off, for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work, would you like to tell us a bit about you and your body of work?
Sure, I've been a Godzilla fan, basically since I was, cognizant. I think I saw my first one when I was about 4 years old. Mm-hmm. Discovered G-Fan when I was 10, because G-Fan was the first, Godzilla magazine I'd ever seen, so I was pretty hyped about that. I started writing for G-Fan. After I wrote for G-Fan, I had a few non-fiction history books published on New Mexico, and just the past year, I started publishing books on the Godzilla movies and just Japanese giant monster movies in general. So I've done a dozen books, and 3 of those are tokusatsu related.
Very nice. So, despite having tokusatsu books being like a small portion of your larger library, what would you say has been your biggest passion, or like the biggest thing that you've proclaimed yourself to be a fan of?
Definitely, yeah. Godzilla is my thing. Some people are into Star Wars and Batman. Mm-hmm. Godzilla is my number one. Absolutely.
Okay, and have your recent tokusatsu books detailing the history of these giant monsters, as well as your recent book on lost films. Why have they only now been like your most recent books?
Well, in the past, I'd always had like publishers. Like I never intended to ever self-publish anything. Mm-hmm. And what had happened is I wrote a book on all of the old Japanese tokusatsu daikaiju films with a publisher in mind, and I thought for sure they'd take it because they did books on spaghetti westerns and kung fu and just niche genres. So I thought for sure they'd want Japanese giant monsters. I never heard back from them, so I don't even know if they ever got my proposal or not. So I just decided to self-publish the book. I thought it's just sitting there doing nothing, so why not? And it was kind of rudimentary, but it was very well received. I think it sold better than my books that I did on the Roswell UFO crash and Billy the Kid. Like I said, I'm from New Mexico, so those are the sorts of subjects that I write about. But on Amazon, I kind of, frankly, I turned up my nose to self-publishing, but I make more money with self-publishing than I do with the actual publisher by far. So the first book I did was called The Big Book of Japanese Giant Monster Movies, Volume 1, 1954 through 1980. And the reason I gave it that kind of simplistic title was I thought, there might be people searching on Amazon who don't know the word kaiju, and they might just type in Japanese giant monster. So, and, then I did a Volume 2 covering the Heisei area. And then, I really wanted to do another book. And my favorite things to read about whenever I'd read like Steve Rifle's book or Ed Godziszewski's book, I loved it when they would have their little sidebars on the Godzilla movies that didn't get made, and I always wished someone would do a whole book on it. And I decided to just see how much material I could find and just do that myself. So that's how that book came to be.
I see. So, going back to the very beginning, what inspired you to start writing your own books and getting them published?
I've always enjoyed writing, and again, GFan kind of helped me get published because GFan was the first place ever actually published me, and I used them as a reference for something else, and that in a roundabout, long story, lengthy discussion, it kind of led to my first ever book. So. But yeah, I just enjoy writing. I think it's a good hobby to have because it doesn't really cost you anything to sit at a keyboard and just kind of type away. So.
Okay, cool. And have the majority of your books been mostly nonfiction?
Yeah, I've actually never done a fictional book. I've tried, but you kind of need an agent for that, and it's really difficult. And I will say that I think fiction is the one thing where if you want to be successful, you actually do need a real publisher. If you just self-publish your fiction, people will usually they'll turn up their nose to it. Very rarely will your fiction do very well. I know the book Aragon was initially self-published, and an agent saw it, and then the agent got the author a bigger publisher, and that's when the Aragon Dragon books really exploded. So,
right.
I mean, it's kind of possible, but it's very unlikely. So, I think if you have fiction, absolutely try to get an agent or a real publisher first, and just use self-publishing as a last resort.
I see then. And so, since you've dabbled in both published works and self-published works, what have been the strengths and weaknesses between the two of them?
So with Godzilla, basically why those books sell so well is people type in, that name on Amazon and they look for content. And there's not a whole lot of Godzilla content in America compared to Star Wars or James Bond.
Oh, yeah.
There's kind of a void there. So I guess that's what I was saying with fiction, people won't even know what to search for. That if you create a fictional character, that no one's going to type in that name, but whereas with Godzilla or something nonfiction that already exists, you've got high searchability, I guess you'd call it. So if you've got a topic that people already search for, then you've kind of got built-in, I wouldn't call it marketing, but people will discover that on Amazon. So but with self-publishing, you make a lot more money. With the publisher, you'll typically get about $1 a book, and that's it. But with self-publishing, you get like 3 to 4 times that amount, so it's pretty nice.
I see. And let's see. What is it like? Well, you mentioned before that you got kind of like your foot in the door through GFan, and so I've been very curious. So what was it like working with them at the very beginning?
I love JD Lee's a very nice guy. I've corresponded with him, I guess I should say, since I was a little kid, and he's always been very generous with his time, So he also wrote the foreword to my book, which I'm really happy about. I've made quite a few fan friends in the Godzilla community. And all of them have just been great. Really love Mark Aramillo, who's famous for the fan films. Really great guy.
Yeah, that is definitely one person who. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah,
no, that's fine.
he's definitely one person who knows how to find like the very obscure stuff. And I can't wait to see his eventual release of Kaiju Gaiden.
Yeah, and I actually just talked to him about that today, so I won't say
Really?
anything because I don't
Okay.
know what all he wants to officially, release about that. But he actually offered to let me be one of the interview subjects on this, which I'm really flattered
Oh
and
wow.
honored. Maybe talk about some of the stuff like Bride of Godzilla and some of those crazy unmade films. So
Sweet. Awesome. Anyways, please continue about the people that you've met through GFan.
yeah, again, it's like everybody that I asked to contribute something to my book, they were all very generous. Nobody turned me down. My favorite story is GFan now has a features editor. His name is Ted Johnson. He's a really smart guy because I would submit articles to GFan, and then I would read my own articles, and they would be filled with all this crazy information that was so cool that I did not write. And so I finally had to ask JD. I was like, "Hey, that's cool. I'm happy with it, but like, where did that come from? Because like, I had no idea that this or that existed." And JD told me, "Well, I've got a new features editor, Ted Johnson, and he's very knowledgeable, and he added all that in there." So my hope was that Ted would actually edit my Lost Films book, but you can't just ask someone to edit your book for free. That's really rude,
Oh yeah.
because that would be very time consuming. So what I did, I actually just asked Ted if he would be interested in contributing an essay to the book. And to my great surprise, he came back and said, "Yes, I'll do an essay, and could I edit it?" Because I think Ted enjoys, correcting things, and he definitely corrected a lot of things in my book, factually and speaking of grammar. So he definitely added a lot to that book.
Interesting. And let's see. So speaking of fact checking, how do you go about doing most of your research, and how do you often find and collect information based off of a lot of this information being mostly in Japanese within Japanese books that kind of cover similar topics?
So basically, I couldn't have written this book 5 or 10 years ago. This is all due to the jumps in technology. You have Google Translate, which gives you horrible translations, but if you're smart, you can basically figure it out. But what you need. Okay, let's say you have a Japanese book and you're just dying to read a certain page. What you would do is you would scan that page. And then you would get an OCR software that recognizes text on a scanned image.
Okay.
And the OCR will rip that off. And so that's what I would do is I would scan a page out of Toho Tokusatsu Unpublished Works or something like that, and then I would run the text that I had ripped off through Google Translate, and I could kind of get an idea of what the storyline was and what was going on. I will say the scripts are a lot easier than novels because just the other day I got a novel called Gamera versus Phoenix, which started out as a Nissan Takahashi script that he couldn't get made into film, so he had it published as a novel. And that was, I noticed, a little bit more difficult to translate because novels are so detailed compared to a script, which is kind of simple and it tells you the action and. So I definitely noticed an interest or a difference with that. But yeah, if you have Japanese books you want to translate yourself, again, all you need is some OCR and Google Translate. It's free and it's fast.
Okay. And so, do you go about collecting the majority of these books for research? Like, do you go out and like buy them and have them imported?
I do. I used to buy them off of eBay, and I finally wised up and realized just to set up an account with Amazon Japan, much cheaper. You definitely. I'm not going to say you get ripped off on eBay. I understand what those guys do. They buy it from CD Japan or Amazon Japan, then they have to kind of jack up the prices so they make a profit. But
Right.
if you want to circumvent that, definitely just go with CD Japan or Amazon Japan.
Okay.
But yeah, I just order from there typically.
Okay. And have you ever considered at some point in the future ever hiring a translator?
Um, Gosh, that would be nice. I think what if I hired a translator, the profit to the expense ratio would be it wouldn't really be worth it. It wouldn't be profitable. I mean, I don't do this just to make money. I do it because I enjoy it. But it's nice to be able to make a little money off of it. And my dad used to have a business which he sold, which is what I did. So right now I'm actually just making a living off of my books. So now I'm getting really serious about trying to make these things as good as I can make them and put out plenty of content.
Okay. And let's see. In terms of the fact checking, you mentioned before that you were interested in getting an editor to do that sort of stuff, but unfortunately wasn't able to. Have you been able been able to get extra information from other sources, or like from Mark Jaramillo, for instance, or August Ragone?
Yeah, both of them helped me quite a bit. Again, Mark actually wrote a guest essay for the book, and he also did an entire appendix on the fan films.
Oh, right,
so I worked
yeah.
very closely with Mark. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And let's see. And how was it like collaborating with August Ragone? Because I know has made a number of contributions towards the kaiju tokusatsu fan base.
Okay, with August, it was just the odd question on Facebook here and there.
Okay.
So no like official involvement with the book, but he definitely answered questions and things like that. And just the other day, he actually helped to kind of debunk the idea that Godzilla versus the Devil wasn't a real film, because I posted some stuff on Facebook that I had found, and then he chimed in and kind of confirmed that, yeah, he'd seen Japanese sources on that film as well, because Toho Kingdom did this thing where they debunked it, and I tended to believe Toho Kingdom on that, but I've definitely found apparently Godzilla versus the Devil was an actual screenplay.
Okay. So it was like a thing that physically existed.
And unfortunately, and unfortunately, the only man who can really confirm that, Ruben Berkovich, I actually managed to find his contact information, and I called him, or I called his house, and his caregiver told me, he's really too old to give interviews anymore, because I believe he's 95 or 94. Wow. But yeah, he was the man who helped to write Frankenstein Conquers the World and War of the Gargantuas, and so.
Cool.
So it's too bad. I think we just missed him by a few years. He probably could have answered quite a few questions.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at that age, you can probably wonder. You have to wonder like how much he can possibly remember.
And I kind of hated to call. I hate to call people I don't know.
Right.
But with older people, you have one of two types. You have ones that love to tell you their stories. You know what I mean? That they love.
Sit down, Sonny. I'm about to tell you an old tale.
Yeah. But at least I tried. And Steve Rifle also tried, because I asked Steve, I was like, have you ever tried to contact him? And he told me yes, but he could never ever get him. So.
I see.
But yeah, just in case we got lost in translation there for anyone, Ruben Berkovich is the one who supposedly wrote Godzilla versus the Devil for Henry G. Saperstein. So.
So to switch gears a bit, to go right from the beginning, how were you first introduced to Japanese monster cinema?
My parents rented Godzilla in 1985 for me. So I was actually born about a month after that movie came out in U.S. theaters. And so I was probably about 5 when I saw it. It's not the best Godzilla movie, probably for like a 4 or 5-year-old, but I think that was just the only one they saw at the video store that night. And I think later on I saw stuff like Godzilla versus Gigan, Godzilla versus Megalon, and I definitely love those.
Yeah. I think my history has kind of been similar to that as well, where as a child I didn't really appreciate Godzilla 85 or 84, but it's something that I grew to love as I grew older and was able to understand it's more of its political and mature themes. I was also more of a fan of like the Showa era, the more wacky, over the top, very imaginative movies. Let's see. And so what would you say has been your favorite Godzilla movie by far?
I think Godzilla versus the Sea Monster is actually my favorite. I just thought, as far as like monster action goes, it's really not all that great, but I just enjoy the storyline. I thought from from a perspective of the storyline and the editing and the pacing, I think it's a really good, solid action movie. So I wouldn't say it's like my favorite Godzilla fight. I don't really think that should be the reason that this or that is your favorite movie. You just like the fight. I just like that film in general. Kyle Bird was really appalled because he had seen somewhere that Legend of the Dinosaurs is one of my favorite tokusatsu films, and it totally is. So Legend of Dinosaurs might actually be like my favorite of all of them. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
It's hard for me to pick a favorite, but that one's definitely up there.
Right. And it's also really cool that you mentioned Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, because that was my very first Godzilla movie, and it's a film that I have a lot of nostalgia for, and I think it's like pretty underrated in terms of like the fans' perception of that film. Like I think like the Godzilla versus the Sea Monster unfortunately gets overlooked a lot when people think of their favorite movies, or think of like their go-to Godzilla movies. They think of like stuff with Mothra, stuff with Ghidorah, maybe a little Jet Jaguar kookiness there, but then they never give any love to Sea Monster.
Yeah, and with me, everyone just constantly praises Godzilla 54 and Godzilla versus the Thing, and those are probably, ironically, two of the ones that like I hardly ever watch. Like if I watch one, it's probably usually going to be Sea Monster, Gigan, Megalon, any of the Heiseis, or I actually don't know. Is it Heisei or Heisei? How do you say it?
I from what through my Japanese studies, I understand it's Heisei, because whenever an I is after the E, the I extends the E sound.
Ah, interesting.
So yeah, because it's Heisei, it's Heisei. Yeah, but before I came to Japan, I also had a lot of confusion over how to pronounce that. It was like Heisei, Heisei, HC, who say, what say.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's no, like everyone has, it's kind of like the Godzilla names themselves. Like nobody knows how to pronounce like the majority of these names. Anguirus, Angurus, Anguilas, Anguirus, Varan, Baron, Baron.
And a big fault of that is just the people who dub the movies.
Oh yeah,
you get those Australian and those Australian voices from Hong Kong would say things like Godzilla and Anguirus.
Yeah. Or you got like those like British voice actors attempting to sound American.
Yeah.
Or even like the bad actors they would get, especially for the Heisei films.
They had a whole. Did you go to the G-Fest panel on Godzilla characters and Scrooge Jones and everybody was talking about SS9 from Godzilla versus Biollante and just some of the really bad, actors from the Heisei era?
Oh no, I didn't. I attended a couple of panels each of the G-Fests, each day of G-Fest this year. But I was very busy. I was either like at the artist alley or recording videos with my other YouTube Godzilla kaiju YouTuber friends, or doing the other stuff. But unfortunately, I didn't. I'm sure it was hilarious, because I think like for the worst / best actors, quote unquote best actors of the Heisei series, Biollante would probably be my favorite film for that sort of thing.
Well, and here's a funny tidbit about that. I read Kazuki Omori's very first treatment for Biollante, and initially his name is not SS9, it's ASS9. It's Ass9.
Oh,
that's his name. I think being Japanese, he may not have realized that he was spelling ass, but he did.
Okay, because that sort of thing still happens to this day. There was like one time I was downtown, and there was some like clothing shop. And it was like fashion, amazing, Gifu. You can guess what those those initials spell out. And it's like right there. They put the initials F-A-G right there, and then like what they each represent. It's like a banner with that thing. It's like, oh no.
Well, you know what else too? In those Japanese books, I'll notice sometimes they like to put English writing in the book, like a Godzilla title, and every once in a while I'll notice like a funny glaring typo or Yeah, so it's interesting.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of half-assed English in Japan because
Yeah.
it's really ironic because even though they push the Japanese education system pushes people to learn more English like from I don't know like kindergarten to, or like first grade, second grade, it's not or like they continue to teach English from like elementary school all throughout high school, but then after high school, a lot of these Japanese people they realize there is no real need for English within Japanese society, and so the majority of them just forgot or just have a very poor grasp because there's nowhere for them to utilize it. So it's kind of like when you take Spanish or French in high school, you're not going to use it, so you're going to eventually forget everything you learned in high school. Yeah, that's kind of like the thing, the sad reality, and when it comes to English, the education of the English language in Japan, and yeah, even so, like it still happens to this day. Anytime you'd see some piece of Japanese media that attempts to use English, whether it's in the title or in the dialogue or somewhere else, it's always something that looks very awkward to a native speaker. Since we were talking about Godzilla versus Biollante, my favorite line was probably like we had the Seradian, the owner of the Seradian chemical company, where he's like, "We must prevent the Japan from producing any more of that."
Yeah, I didn't see that because initially I just saw the HBO Miramax English dub, and they obviously they dubbed over it. But so yeah, I've seen it now that the Japanese version is available, and I was pretty stunned.
Yeah. And let's see. Since we were talking about Godzilla versus Biollante, you mentioned about a couple days ago before our recording that you had some interesting information regarding the first draft of the first treatment of Godzilla versus Biollante.
Yes, I've got a cool exclusive for you. I don't think anyone in the West has shared this with anybody yet. Like, I haven't seen it in any books. I haven't seen it posted on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
But I got Godzilla versus Biollante Perfection, the book, which is just a whole book developed to Biollante.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that the TriStar Godzilla had the most crazy, torturous developmental period of all the Godzilla movies, but I think it might actually be Biollante. I mean, the development process on that thing was crazy.
It kind of makes sense because Godzilla 84 came out in 84, and it took about half a decade for them to eventually make a follow-up to that film. And I am aware that there was like a writing competition, and that the two scripts that almost became Biollante turned out to be Biollante, and the other script ended up becoming Gunhead. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the production history turned out to be that difficult.
Yeah. Gunhead's a big can of worms. Maybe we can open up that later on
totally,
down the line.
Yeah.
Because that would be interesting to talk about too.
I feel like I have more of an appreciation for Gunhead than most other people. I just like that.
I liked it. I liked it fine.
Yeah, I enjoyed it overall, mostly on a visual level, because I'm a sucker for that 80s cyberpunk aesthetic.
Well, and even people say it's a Terminator ripoff, but James Cameron says it's one of his favorite films. So
okay, they always they always say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah. But you brought up the Biollante story contest.
Right.
Here's what's interesting about that. They received 5,000 submissions.
Damn.
And what I think is even funnier is they noticed a trend in all of the submissions that they got, that an overwhelming majority of them were about Godzilla being cloned as a weapon, or Godzilla was controlled by an enemy country, or so basically, Shinichiro Kobayashi, who submitted Godzilla versus Biollante, what's funny is in his first draft, Biollante is not a combination of Godzilla and a plant. It's just his daughter Erica, Dr. Shirogami's daughter Erica, combined with a plant. And the dumb thing about that is there's no logical explanation for why the plant grows to be Godzilla's size. Right,
because you think like involving Godzilla's DNA would be a no-brainer to make another giant monster.
Yeah. And so that was Tomoyuki Tanaka's idea. He mandated. He said, okay, in your next draft, you have to have Godzilla cells in this plant, and you also have to do away with the other monster you created, which was the Dutalios, the ratfish hybrid, which I think is really cool. No explanation as to why it grew gigantic either, but I think it's
like a prototype
really cool monster.
like a prototype experiment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, and everybody knows that. I'm sure we were setting up this startling new information, so I better get to that before people lose interest. Okay, so here it is.
It's gonna be like from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Everyone's like, "Get on with it!"
Yeah. So you've got just so people are clear, you've got the Kobayashi draft. He did 3 drafts, and Tomoyuki Tanaka actually says in that book, or said he says every time he writes it, it gets worse. And so that's why he handed it off to Kazuki Omori. And so this is Omori's first treatment. Okay, so in the finished Godzilla versus Biollante, I don't know how well you can remember every aspect of that movie, but there's an early scene with Dr. Shiragami and Asuka. And Asuka is asking Dr. Shiragami about his controversial idea to save the semen of Nobel Prize winners. Do you kind of remember that scene?
Let's see. I do. Yeah, I do remember. It was like very early on where they were communicating with each other.
Yeah, it's just one little throwaway mention. Well, in his first treatment, it's a major aspect of his character. This idea of freezing the genes of these Nobel Prize winners, and it's something that he actually did. He didn't just think about doing it. He did it, and he got, I guess, thrown out of Japan. He had to go to another country, and he gets to come back to Japan. So this first Omori draft, it's kind of similar to the finished film. You've got Dr. Shiragami and his daughter Erika, and Erika's watching TV, and she sees this girl named Miki Sagusa who can talk to plants. And she tells Dr. Shiragami about it, and he says, "Oh, I'm sure that's just a hoax. That's fake. That can't be real." And the story progresses, and Erika gets this hunch that maybe Miki Sagusa is one of her father's experiments. And I can't remember how that comes up, but so Erika does this investigation, and she does discover that Miki Sagusa was one of the babies that he created through artificial insemination and gene manipulation.
Wow.
And it turns out it was Dr. Shiragami's own genetic material. And some of that kind of got lost in translation for me, like how that all went down. But for sure, in Omori's first draft, Miki Sagusa is Shiragami's daughter and also Erika's sister. And it's kind of like a surprise reveal as the story goes on.
So
and also, yeah, I just want to say, Erika survives most of that story, and she doesn't die until the middle of the story.
Right, that was going to be my question, because that sounds like a lot to do within the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and it's so I think Omori really liked that idea. I think Tomoyuki Tanaka is the one who made him cut it, because Tanaka kept trying to cut Miki from the script. He didn't really like her. And I guess Omori also had a scene where Miki is so strong that she's able to levitate Godzilla, and that's another scene that he made a cut. But I think Omori, he really liked Miki, and I think he had plans for her because... Okay, so after Biollante was written and produced, Omori started writing Mothra vs. Began, and Miki was also in that film. And Omori said in an interview that Mothra vs. Began was the first installment of a 4-part series, and he said that over the course of this 4-part series, Miki Sagusa's secret history would be revealed. So I kind of have a hunch that maybe he had an idea to use that rejected origin story for her later on down the road, just because he had developed some clout with the studio and he could get away with it. So,
I see. And so it looks like the writer Omori, he was very attached to this Miki character. So I do wonder how he feels now, if he's still alive, or how he felt then about the final version of Mickey and how he felt about what they eventually did to her throughout the Heisei era.
I'm kind of surprised at how since Omori wrote Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, how Mickey is handled in that, because she's kind of just lurking in the background.
That is true. Yeah, he wrote the majority of these Heisei films, right?
Yeah, he wrote
Right. I'm an
Biollante.
idiot.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was responsible for the direction of Miki Sagusa's character. And yeah, it would be interesting. It is kind of ironic that for someone who was really into making Miki Sagusa like the be all end all most important character in this universe, or at least within the first film, and he ends up kind of doing nothing with her for 2 movies.
Exactly. And then what's ironic is he didn't write Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which was one of the first ones where they actually did something with
Right,
it.
that's, oh my god, that's crazy.
And in fact, his Omori came back for Destroya, and his original ending for Destroya was Mickey feels guilty that Godzilla Jr. Died, so she kills herself.
Huh, okay. Interesting. To have her like die alongside Junior, and if Godzilla was going to die as well in that version of the script, yeah, to have her die along with Godzilla and his son. Although I do like what they eventually did with her, where she eventually retires and kind of hands off. Kind of, they never like explicitly mention it, but I always got the feeling that she was just handing off her role to the next generation, the new psychic girl.
Yeah.
That is very strange because yeah, it the way you described it, it kind of puts Mickey's whole backstory and her whole role in Biollante kind of gives a whole new different kind of context, as well as it kind of characterizes Dr. Shiragami almost drastically, I would say. It kind of makes him out to be like kind of a Dr. Frankenstein sort of person who has dealt with morally ambiguous experiment, as opposed to this one-time deal where he plays God just this once, and when it goes out of it gets out of hand.
Yeah, and he does get compared to Frankenstein in Omori's first treatment as well. There's a joke about that.
I see. And so how do you feel personally about this version of Biollante?
As far as like the Mickey things go, the Mickey aspect goes, I think that would have been really cool to learn in like a future installment. Once you've gotten used to Mickey, it's like, oh wow, that's her secret past. I think that would have been cool. So Godzilla vs. Biollante is actually another one of my favorite Godzilla films, and I think it turned out pretty well. Probably the best version of that film was Omori's like second or third full draft script, because there's a difference between a treatment, which is basically just a lengthy synopsis, and a full-fledged screenplay. And his full-fledged first couple of screenplays have some really cool extra sequences in them, like SS9 is running away from Colonel Gondo, and they have a car chase. And SS9 drives a Mustang in the script. He drives it through Godzilla's legs as Godzilla walks across the freeway to get away from Colonel Gondo. So, I mean, it's one of those cool scenes that, it's too bad that they couldn't probably have filmed it even if they had the budget.
Right, or I'm thinking, like, I don't think the human action scenes have ever gotten that complex when trying to mix it up. Like, the only times that, like, humans would ever really directly interact with Godzilla, they usually do I think back to Gondo's death and Shindo's death, ironically, both the characters dying after seeing Godzilla face-to-face within a building, because that seems like a rather easy effect to pull off by projecting Godzilla's image, projecting Godzilla imagery of Godzilla in front of a window.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, then. I guess for me personally, it is really interesting to see kind of explain where Mickey gets her powers from by her being a science experiment, because they never really went into detail as to where she got her powers from, because it's like, Godzilla 84 was, for the most part, somewhat like set in the real world, and then by the second film, psychics exist for no reason.
Yeah.
And so, but I guess in the end, I'm kind of glad that she didn't have any ties towards Shiragami, because none of the cast members ever return. in future films outside of Mickey. So it's kind of good to cut all that out and let her do her own thing. Although it was interesting to have someone who was a subordinate of Gondos play a big role in the form of Yuki from Space Godzilla, which probably, for me personally, was one of the only things I really enjoyed out of the human cast of that movie.
That's something I'm trying to research right now because Shinichiro Kobayashi did designs for Space Godzilla, because they say Space Godzilla was an evolution of Biollante in space. So I think Shinichiro Kobayashi may have had maybe a little hand in certain elements from that storyline, and I just can't get any confirmation on that yet. But he definitely submitted designs for Space Godzilla, which is interesting.
Okay. So it would make sense if you had someone who was involved with Biollante or was a fan of Biollante and want to have some parts of it, some of its essence carry over into a future project. So in your research, have you ever found, have there ever been other examples such as this, like these kind of mind-blowing revelations, at least to you personally, that kind of made you look at a certain character or a certain film in a whole new light?
Quite a few of them. Maybe not certain characters, but just certain ideas that the screenwriters had at the time. Okay, so we're always told that Ken Kuronuma and gosh, I can't remember who the other writers wrote Rodan, but actually, the guy who really got the ball rolling with Rodan his name was Hideo Unagami, and he was a small bit part actor for Toho, and he actually played one of the Mysterians. But he wrote what could have been the third Godzilla movie. He wrote the sequel to Godzilla Raids Again. It was called The Bride of Godzilla.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, really crazy, far out story.
Did you ever talk about that at your panel at G-Fest?
Yeah, that was probably the one I actually talked about the most.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Yeah,
I'm thinking,
people are really interested in that one.
Now I remember, it was a Space Godzilla. That was the one I wanted you to talk about, but you didn't got the chance, I think.
Yeah, Space Godzilla, I think Kevin Derendorf has a really good translation of that on his blog, Mazer Patrol.
Yeah, I saw that. That was really interesting. But
I mean, apart from that, though, I just really don't know much about it. I don't know how seriously that was ever considered,
Right. That's a lot of the biggest question I often ask myself whenever I hear about any of these rumored lost films. Were how far were they along in production? Because obviously none of them were ever close to getting filmed, but like how far in production, or how seriously did Toho ever consider these ideas, or were they just an idea that was pitched and immediately knocked down, rejected? But to go back to Bride of Godzilla, because I'm sure there are still a lot of people who are not familiar with that film. Would you mind going more into that and how your reaction to that project upon discovering it?
Yeah, well, what struck me first of all was just how similar it was to Rodan, and it was written the year before Rodan was produced. Because a big part of the story is set in Kyushu, in the mines, and they discover this. Well, first of all, there's these murderous insects, kind of like the Meganuron, that come out of the Kyushu mines, and they attack people. That's in Bride of Godzilla. It's just that they're not called the Meganuron. They're more like giant lice, is what they are. And then, the miners get lost in a cave-in, and they discover this horrific underground world, except for it's much more grand. They did basically discover an opening into the hollow earth, and Godzilla and Anguirus and a proto version of Rodan, which isn't named, but it's just a giant prehistoric bird. They all live in this underground cavern, and eventually Godzilla, Anguirus, and the proto Rodan, they get out, and there's the aerial dogfight with Rodan in the skies, that's in there. So to me, it's just too much of a coincidence that they made Rodan the next year, even though Hideo Unagami gets no credit. I feel like he has to have, Tomoyuki Tanaka had to have given that script to Ken Kuronuma and Takeo Murata and just told him, hey, I like this element. Make sure you work that into the new story. And Unagami, though, he did get a small bit part in Rodan. So even though his name isn't listed, he has an on-screen role. I don't know who he is, but he has a little bit part in that movie. And the other big crazy development for Bride of Godzilla, it more or less developed into Godzilla 1984, as crazy as that sounds. In 1978, Tomoyuki Tanaka, he gave that script to Shuichi Nagahara and told him, readapt this for today, the late 1970s. So Nagahara did 3 modern drafts of The Bride of Godzilla that were a little more down to earth, and with each draft, it slowly evolved into Godzilla 1984, and that's where Shockilus, the giant sea louse, comes from.
Oh, I see.
It's Bride of Godzilla.
It's kind of ironic. Another sign of irony that by adapting Bride of Godzilla into 84, you end up cutting out the Bride of Godzilla from the Bride of Godzilla.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think?
And also,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, with the part where we always kind of wonder, why does Godzilla rise up out of that volcano at the beginning? So that's basically Godzilla rising up from under the earth, just like in Bride of Godzilla.
Oh, okay, from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Where you saw that the mountain explode.
We don't really know what happens, but that's what I always took it to be.
Yeah, me too. Wasn't that stock footage from another movie?
I'm not sure. I guess it could have been from Submersion of Japan or something like that. I'm not sure.
I could have sworn I read that somewhere, but it's been a while since I've came across that information, so I could be wrong though. When it came to like the actual Bride of Godzilla, the idea of this robot, this one of the human characters was, from what I understand, was a human scientist who had a giant robot daughter, and she had the appearance of a naked girl. Do you think they ever would have been? You think Toho would have ever been okay with that idea?
I think when they say naked girl, they mean more like a naked Barbie doll. You know what I mean?
Right,
I think that's what they really mean. But who knows?
Even still, would that be okay? Yeah. I mean, I understand.
Yeah.
Japan has very different standards when it comes to nudity, where it's not seen as a very sexual taboo thing. It's pretty much like a very innocent thing. I mean, for God's sakes, a huge part of their culture involves family outings that involve them going to bathhouses where they just, or go to hot springs where it's just, men and women all in one big giant room, separated by sex, all in one room, just comfortably being naked around each other as they all take this bath or go relax in the hot springs, because to them, being naked around each other, at least within the same sex, is no big deal.
It's definitely an odd script, though. I'm not surprised they didn't produce it. I think it was partly it was too expensive because they wanted it to be in widescreen and color.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and they weren't even doing that until Rodan a year later. And I guess it would have been too ambitious to pull off a Godzilla meets Journey to the Center of the Earth kind of deal.
And it had mermaids too. That was the other weird thing. Yeah, and those would have been probably very, you would have to have applied a prosthetic to an actress, and it just would have been a whole set of challenges that you didn't need.
Right. It does look like a very ambitious fantasy driven kind of film from the sound of it, and I don't think we ever got anything like that until Mothra, and even then that was still pretty tame compared to this. In terms of going to Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, actually, just today, for the first time, I read the synopsis for the original Mothra, the Luminous Fairies in Mothra, so I just had to bring that up.
Okay, then. Interesting. Let's see. And the other one, the one that really shocked me the most was a Space Godzilla. Not to let our audience know, I think this was a pitch to reboot Godzilla before they eventually went with Godzilla 84, and it has nothing to do with Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. This is essentially Star Wars meets 2001: A Space Odyssey meets Godzilla, although it really has nothing to do with Godzilla because they completely recharacterized him, or should I say her.
Yeah.
And her entire species.
Yeah, that would have been... You know what I wish Toho would do is I wish they would do some direct-to-video anime
Mm-hmm.
of just these abandoned concepts, specifically Star Godzilla and Bride of Godzilla. And just,
Uh-huh.
I think that would be really cool.
Which one is Star Godzilla?
I'm sorry, I meant Space Godzilla.
Oh, okay.
I just mixed them up. But yeah, there was Star Godzilla was a rumored Hong Kong production. I don't know if that was how far that actually got, but it was just announced in Variety in 1980, and Toho canned it with a lawsuit.
I wonder if Senpote-san had anything to do with that.
I don't think so, but who knows?
Yeah. Have you ever looked into? I know you've mostly covered Japanese, focus on Japanese monster movies, but have you ever looked into the any other aspects of obscure Japanese superhero medium like Sentai, Kamen Rider, or Ultraman?
Yeah, so I do cover the Lost Ultraman movies that I knew about in the Lost films. I've discovered a lot more now that I'll write about in the future, but I don't really get into like Kamen Rider and the human-sized monsters,
Stuff.
but
Yeah,
anything,
you want to see like the big giants in rubber suits beat each other up and smash models, right?
yeah. So as long as it's giant, I'll get involved. But to
Right.
me, I don't want to take on anything Kamen Rider related because it's just too much. I'd be lost. I don't know anything about it. Ultraman, even Ultraman, I don't know a whole lot about compared to some fans, but
Right.
I at least know enough that I can navigate
Right.
it.
Yeah, he's an alien who comes from space, can only be active for around 3 minutes, and has a human form and fights monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, here's a funny little side story. There's an Ultraman movie that basically got canceled all because of Bandai and toy rights.
Okay.
So Shuzuke Kaneko was going to do a Ultraman movie, or no,
nice.
Ultra Q movie with
okay.
it was basically It's basically the whole crew from the Heisei Gamera series was going to do an Ultra Q movie
Mm-hmm.
in the 1980s, and it was going to be just like Twilight Zone the movie.
Oh,
It was going to be like an anthology, and you would have this classic monster in this segment, this classic monster in the next segment. Well, okay, so the problem arose was one of the producers was a toy company called Sega Toy Company. And the problem was Bandai owned exclusive rights to the toys of all these monsters, and Sega was like, well, we can't make any money, so no, you have to make up new monsters so we can sell those. And so Kaneko and everybody left, and that crashed that movie.
Aw.
Yeah.
See, I don't understand why they couldn't just. So Kaneko, was he working with Tsuburaya to make this movie?
Yeah, Tsuburaya was involved.
But
gosh.
Sega was like its main sponsor, right?
Yeah, it was one of the co-producers. It was a weird deal. It turned into Ultra Q, the movie Legend from the Stars, eventually.
Right.
That's why the monster in that movie is brand new, is so Sega could make a toy.
Right, but Kaneko was not attached to that movie, right?
No,
Right, because he wanted to. I guess he seemed like the kind of guy who was very nostalgic and really wanted to work with the monsters he grew up with. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay, that's very unfortunate. I see. And I do recall you covered. Did you cover like one Ultraman movie within your latest book?
Yeah, Don Glut, I talked to him, and it's his movie, Ultraman Hero from the Stars.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that I kind of got into and covered.
Mm-hmm. I see. And what is like the story behind that project?
So the irony behind this one is that script's in English, but I haven't ever been able to actually read the whole script. But the story is it's in the Showa.
I can't understand any of this.
Yeah, the continuity. It's the Showa Ultraman continuity. It's actually a lot like Dinosaur War Eisenborg, or however you say it. I might mispronounce it, but
That was the one that became Attack of the Super Monsters, right?
Yeah, so they had the TV series where dinosaurs lived underground, and they survived and they thrived and became intelligent. So what's funny is Don Glut was totally unaware that Tsuburaya had done this TV series, but he had the same idea. So his villains in his Ultraman movie are a race of super intelligent, evolved dinosaurs that live underground.
That's also the plot. Sorry, that's also the plot for Getter Robo.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard of that one.
Oh yeah, Getter Robo was the an anime that was adapted from a manga that was came from the same team behind Mazinger Z, and Robo was like kind of like Japan's first combiner robot. And the main enemy of that film was the Dinosaur Empire, which were dinosaurs that evolved into like humanoids with intelligence, and they create giant cyborg dinosaurs to pilot or remote control and have them try to take over the world, with the three pilots of Robo attempting to stop them each time.
Okay, when did that get produced?
Let's see. I know it was in probably the mid or late 70s. I'll do a quick check right now.
Yeah, so they all apparently had the same idea.
Yeah. Let's see here. When did Robo, at least the manga, start? Okay, so the TV show was from April 4th, 1974 to May 8th, 1975. And as for the manga, it came out January 1974. Are you still there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't sure if you still had some more facts to...
Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. No, it's... So, yeah, the manga of Robo came out January 74. The anime then came out April 74. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how that lines up with your projects.
Oh, okay, yeah. Dinosaur War, Eisenborg, I think was like 78 or 79.
Okay.
So it came after.
Yeah, at least that one has the distinction of being half of it in live action.
Yeah. That's what always got me, was why did they decide to do that video compilation movie Attack of the Super Monsters when they could have used Dinosaur Dinosaur Task Force Poseidon, which was all live action.
I see.
You know, they could have used that, and it would have been so much better, I think. And there's also, since we're talking about lost films, there's kind of a little sequel to Attack of the Super Monsters that everybody forgot about, called Return of the Dinosaurs. Have you heard of that one?
I'm not familiar with Return of the Dinosaurs.
Okay, it's the same thing. It just uses another Super series that's half cartoon, half live action with dinosaurs.
There's another one of those?
There's actually a trilogy.
Oh, okay.
And I don't remember the names of all of them, but there are 3 in a row, and the last one, Poseidon, that I mentioned, was the only one that was in all live action.
Ah, I see. Huh. I guess the 70s was like a really popular time for dinosaurs then.
Yeah.
Huh. I can only imagine what happened. Maybe Godzilla was so popular that by the time the 70s Godzilla films started to dip down in quality, that's when TV decided to pick up the pace, and clearly they were inspired by the success of cinematic tokusatsu. They decided, hey, let's make TV tokusatsu and let's continue on with the dinosaurs then.
Yeah, who knows where that came from? Because Legend of the Dinosaurs was a flop in theaters, so it definitely was not popular, but I guess they were popular on TV, though.
Right. Let's see. Okay, then. And I think I could have sworn there was another book that you mentioned in your Lost Film. There was another movie you mentioned in your Lost Films book. Was it the unofficial American Ultraman movie? Like Space Warriors 2000?
Oh, yeah, I did cover that one as well. I had the misfortune of watching that once, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Right. I only could manage to... I found it on YouTube, and I could only manage to watch roughly like a couple minutes before I had to shut the thing off because I couldn't bear to listen to that audio.
Yeah, that's awful. I can't believe there were people that wanted it actually officially released, because it's horrible. I mean, we like some bad movies, obviously, but I mean, that's beyond bad.
Oh yeah, totally. And let's see. Have you ever touched upon the any of the movies that involved the I forgot, what was the Thai company that briefly worked, that Sampote Sans owned and collaborated with Tsuburaya before Sampote Sans tried to take over the international rights to Ultraman?
Yeah, Chayo, and I did cover.
That's it, sorry.
Yeah, I did cover 6 Ultra Brothers versus the Monster Army, and I actually very much enjoyed that one. I thought it was Actually, that's the whole reason I watched Space Warriors,
Mm-hmm.
was I wanted to see the footage from Six Ultra Brothers versus the Monster Army.
Uh-huh.
But the original Thai film, I think it's pretty decent actually. I enjoyed it.
I see. I wonder if Tsuburaya actually continues to release the two movies that they made with Chayo.
I don't believe so. I think they kind of even if they had the rights to, or if I say if they had the rights, it's so murky. I think even if they could, uh, they just want to disavow it, because of the
Right.
bad blood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, Sampodi Sands, he kept a really cool Ultraman movie, another Lost Ultraman film, from being
Ah,
made in
right.
the mid '90s.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted Tsuburaya wanted to shoot an Ultraman movie set in China and shoot it in China,
Mm-hmm.
and that is actually, as I understand it, when they learned that Sands claimed, no, I have the rights to Ultraman everywhere but Japan, and
Mm-hmm.
that kept that film from being made.
Right, right. And it became like a very like a shouting argument where it's like Tsuburaya was like, "No, F you. We own Ultraman outside of Japan."
Yeah.
And they're like, "No, no, good sir, F you. I have this document here that's totally not BS, totally signed by Noboru Tsuburaya." But yeah, that is a very interesting story. And Sapote Sans, he is someone I'm kind of a bit fascinated with due to his like never-ending, his like he's like he doesn't know when to give up when it comes to him and Ultraman. He just
Yeah.
really, really wants to do something with that character, and is willing to do anything, no matter how many times Tsuburaya and the legal court system says no.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, did you ever hear about what was it? Oh yeah, about 2 years ago, I want to say that Sampote Sans and Chayo were trying to make a Hollywood Ultraman movie.
Yeah, Mark Aramiel was telling me about that, so I need to look into that a little better.
Right, because we didn't, because they made a big announcement that a couple of years back where they claimed that they had some investors and producers, and some of the producers also made the first Transformers movie, and that they were going to get ready to make, I think it was Ultraman and Gomora at the 2020 Olympic Games, and they also made an announcement that they were going to have Blu-ray releases for the 6 Ultra shows that they owned, plus Jumbo Gaze, and nothing ever came of that. And I think, I could be wrong here, but I think at that point, Sampote Sans already sold his legal rights, quote unquote legal rights, to of Ultraman and his shows to another company owned by his son, I think. And then when he decided to go off and do this sort of Hollywood announcement, that other company that he sold the rights to came in and said, "Nuh-uh, you can't do this anymore because you already gave us our rights. You can't do anything with the character anymore." And I think that may have shut the Hollywood Ultraman project down. I'm not sure.
I'll definitely have to look into that because it could probably be a chapter in a sequel book or something.
Right, right. I'd probably make a whole entire book out of the whole legal case between Chayo and Tsuburaya. Or
Definitely.
you can even make that into like some sort of like a what do you call it? A biographical drama,
Yeah.
like half fictional, half like half fiction, half nonfiction. Let's see. And anything else I remember that was canceled or not? I do remember Chayo also they were on the verge of creating a TV show of their very own. I forgot, maybe it was like Ultraman Millennial or something. And then
Yeah,
Tsuburaya came
Ultraman
in.
Millennium.
Right, Millennium. And Tsuburaya stopped them, even though they already produced the movie or a couple episodes at that point.
Yeah, you can actually see those on YouTube, so
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
think, yeah.
Huh, that's interesting. I see. Let's see. And so to change topics once again. So I asked you what were some interesting stories or interesting projects you've came across that really got a reaction out of you. Now, at any point in your life have you ever had an experience where you were to share these stories that you've learned and share them with other people? And if so, what has been the story that would usually get the biggest reaction out of your audience?
Okay, you mean like in terms of the Lost Monster movies?
Yeah, that stuff.
Yeah, Bride of Godzilla seems to elicit the biggest response, and Batman meets Godzilla also definitely gets people curious.
Okay, then. Yeah, I can definitely see why that would be the case. And earlier before, we were talking about rumors, especially with Godzilla versus the Devil, and how it was rumored that that was never a movie to begin with, and then then you learned that it was an actual script. From your time researching these movies, what have been some of the most popular inaccurate rumors you've come across?
Probably Jet Jaguar versus Megalon. I have yet to see that in a Japanese source. I think that's an entirely American-made rumor.
Okay.
However, though, Japanese sources I see they're very confusing because they'll say these little mysterious things like Jet Jaguar was meant for more than just a Godzilla movie, and then that's all it says, and it doesn't elaborate. So who knows?
Yeah, I do remember about at last year's G Fest, Billy DeBose had a Zone Fighter panel, and August Ragone was there for maybe like the second half of it. And I remember asking August Ragone directly why Toho would create a show featuring an Ultraman clone when they already got an Ultraman clone in the form of Jet Jaguar, and apparently they couldn't produce a Jet Jaguar show. According to August Ragone, they couldn't create a Jet Jaguar show because I guess part of the character's rights were owned by the designer or creator of the character itself. So I wonder if that had any part in as to why they couldn't make a Jet Jaguar movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's kind of news to me. What I know is they can't find the kid who designed Jet Jaguar today. They can't find him.
Yeah.
They've tried to.
Red Alone, right? That was the original.
Yeah, Red Alone, and they say they say that the reason they changed his name to Jet Jaguar, or some sources I've seen say that they did that and they changed his design and his name. As a way of being able to say, well, you didn't entirely create him, we created him, so they'd have more legal rights. So, I don't understand why you could put him in a film and not use him on a TV series. So, I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, but I guess now we know it was a rights issue. And Toho, I guess, said, screw it. We'll just start from scratch. Make a new guy. Call him Zone Fighter.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, don't you want to already use a character that's already established? F it!
Yeah.
We are Toho. We do what we want.
And also, why not just make it a Godzilla-centric series? I kind of wonder about that, too. Why wasn't it just Godzilla every week?
Right. Maybe it had to do with I can only assume. I know assuming it can be a very dangerous thing when we're talking about rumors and non-concrete facts, but maybe I can assume that maybe there was some sort of maybe it was like physically impossible, technically impossible to have that suit be ready for numerous episodes. Maybe it would have required a lot of refurbishing, or maybe like Godzilla was becoming less popular in the 70s, so they thought if they kept him as like a special guest appearance, that would garner interest in Godzilla by saying, "Oh, here's like a very exclusive episode featuring this character that your parents know about." Yeah. Let's see. What else did I want to ask? Oh, so since we were also talking about how you the difficulty of finding sources for particular kinds of information that have been circulating or information to back up rumors, what have been some of the most difficult topics to research for your books?
There's a few of them I really want to find information on that I can't. That's quite a few actually. Josh, you know how it is sometimes somebody asks you a question and you can't quite think of the answer.
Oh yeah, and your mind kind of draws a blank, even though there's like so many potential answers.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely a lot of projects I want to find more information on, but I just can't. Yeah.
I see. And
Nessie. Okay, here's one. Here's another one that drives me nuts. Yeah. You know there has to be an English language script for Nessie because Hammer wrote it.
Yeah.
yet I've never found one.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. Maybe it's like lost in some old, old desk drawer from some former Hammer writer somewhere in
Probably.
America or the UK or whatever, or some other English-speaking country. Yeah. And so, what have been some in terms of like the difficult projects? Which are some of the films that you have been the most proud of in terms of finding information that no one else has ever been able to get a hold of and publish?
Well, so I wasn't the first person to introduce Bride of Godzilla to the West.
Hmm.
Several bloggers brought up this weird movie called Bride of Godzilla, and they would mention that it was in Toho Tokusatsu Unpublished Works, and I just, I tracked down the book on eBay or Amazon. I bought it and then started translating it.
Hmm.
Gosh, so like probably
Like, yeah, well,
well,
I'm
I mean,
thinking like, what would be
yeah.
like some of like the biggest, like the when you found information, it felt like a big victory. It felt like a highlight of your career.
The Mickey Sagusa thing that we just talked about here for the first time, that one was, I thought, a pretty big deal because I think that's a pretty interesting origin story for her.
Yeah.
I'm looking through my table of contents to jog my memory, to see like what was a discovery that really surprised me.
Maybe if you have enough stories through all this research, you can make like another book that's just the memoirs of researching this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think that'd be too interesting, but I definitely I'm going to do a sister book though on
Hmm.
unmade tokusatsu movies that didn't have giant monsters, like After Japan Sinks,
Hmm.
Frankenstein versus the Human Vapor, The Flying
Oh.
Battleship.
Hmm.
There's scripts for most of those, and I
Hmm.
just didn't put them in this book because it was supposed to be all giant monsters. So
Right, right.
hopefully by next summer I'll have that done and have it out for G Fest.
Okay. But as for like the most difficult or most rewarding experiences when researching movies, is you drawing another blank?
No, I mean I enjoyed researching all of them. It was a blast. It's just
Hmm.
it's very time consuming. Again, Google Translate is instant, but
Hmm.
sorting through all the mess and all the they can't ever translate names right.
Ah,
That's
okay.
their difficulty. It'll translate objects and actions pretty accurately, but names are always different.
Right, right.
Uh,
And God help you if they try to translate the R to an L or the L to an R.
yeah, that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because in Japanese, there is neither an R nor an L in Japanese. It's like a fusion of both. Because I've learned through studying Japanese that the Japanese R, the tongue touches the roof of the mouth, so it's kind of like more of a light L than a hard R. So
Yeah,
while sorry, go
someone
ahead.
was telling me that was the whole thing with Gamma versus Gyron versus Gamma versus Goulion, or however you say it with the L.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, right, right, because it came from guillotine, but then
Exactly.
the katakana says gyuron. Yeah, and so it's
Yeah,
like, is it Gulon? Is it Gilon? It's like, do you go more with the original English word or do you go more with the Japanese pronunciation?
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
always a struggle, yeah. Let's see. But speaking of Gamera, did you ever research this particular lost film where it was sometime during Godzilla 2014's production. Um, it was Yoshimitsu Banno tried to get a Gamera movie off the ground, looking for investors with a pitch for a Gamera movie that was essentially Godzilla 3D to the max, but with Gamera.
Yeah, I researched it a little bit, and I only found one source on that, but yeah. So definitely it's in. I didn't find enough to do a whole entry on it, so that's why it's
Mm.
just in one of the appendices. But yeah, you actually jogged my memory. I bought Yoshimitsu Banu's biography
Oh,
because it
nice.
said it had the real story on Godzilla versus Hedorah too, and so
Mm.
there's a discovery. I finally found in there. Bano says he didn't really write much about Godzilla versus Hedorah in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
He says his sequel was called Godzilla versus Gezilla, and and actually you can translate Godzilla as Bezera. I don't know which one he intended, but it was going to be about an alien monster living down in the ocean who is disturbed by pollution, and it comes up and destroys the Okinawan Expo, and Godzilla has to fight it. And apparently, there's these friendly little alien creatures that live in the water. And it's I guess Tomika Tanaka told them it's interesting, but it would cost too much money to make, and so. Apparently, the whole thing about Banno being banned from ever making another Godzilla movie was kind of blown out of the water. It wasn't quite as bad as that, but
right, because he did work on other movies after Hedorah, right?
yeah, he was. He's only credited as a co-director on Prophecies of Nostradamus, but I think he was more than just a co-director. I think he was pretty. He wrote it. He did quite a bit of the shooting on that. Oh, and while we're on Banno, I've got to mention, did you know he was, up until the time of his death, I think Shin Godzilla inspired him to try doing Shin Hedorah? Did you know that?
I had no idea about that, but I'm not that surprised because that guy was always trying to get a continuation of Hedorah in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, but that is very exciting to hear about.
Yeah, and what's even more is there's a Japanese newspaper site. They have a picture of him holding the Shin Hedorah treatment in his hands, so you know it's written. And so
So now
hopefully
you gotta
someone
track it down.
will share it. Yeah.
Yeah. You're about to go on your cue the Indiana Jones montage music. You show them map of you traveling to Japan.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I'll just if you're already in Japan, I'll just let you handle that.
Yeah. I will find it. Let's see. So to switch gears a bit, how long have you been involved in the G-Fest and the annual G-Fest convention?
I've always wanted to go, but this past year was my first G-Fest ever. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Actually.
Oh, yeah. I think I recall you saying that in your panel at the very beginning. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you first learn about G-Fest? Was it through writing for G-Fan magazine?
Yeah, that's the only reason I know about it, probably.
Okay. And so, what allowed you to finally come to the what allowed you to not only come to the convention for the first time, but to actually have a panel of your very own?
Sure. So again, I kind of mentioned earlier, my dad used to run a business. We had a mobile home park, and we didn't have employees. Like, he and I ran that ourselves. So you really couldn't go on vacations. You couldn't, there's nobody to leave it with. So that was the main reason why, is we had sold that business, so I wasn't tied down to it, and I was finally able to travel. Hey, go out there and do it, and the book was another excuse. I'd never had books to promote. So I kind of had an excuse. I didn't write off the trip, but I guess I could have. You know what I mean? So, Martin Arlt, he is the one who organizes the panels, and I write for his magazine, Mad Scientist, as well. So I just asked him if I could, get a panel on the lost films, and that's how that all worked out.
Okay, that's good. And how do you think the overall experience was, both the panel and your the rest of the convention itself?
Well, I had a blast. I mean, I've done speeches in front of large crowds before for dinners and fundraisers, but usually when I do a historical presentation here in New Mexico, I might speak in front of 80 people max. But I don't know how many people I had in the room at G-Fest. I mean, I guess a couple hundred or more.
Right.
So I mean, it was a pretty big crowd to speak in front of. So, even though I'm a fairly experienced speaker, it was still kind of nerve-wracking to be in front of that many new people.
Right. Yeah, the room was pretty full when my friends and I were there. And it was always fun. I was going to say, it was always fun to hear the audience's reactions to whatever films you would announce.
I was surprised how much they laughed. When I put up the picture on the screen of Godzilla versus Batman, everybody laughed really hard at that. So
yeah.
I guess I've gotten used to it by now, so it's not a surprise. But
yeah, especially if you're someone who, for me personally, I've seen these sorts of projects pop up on Toho Kingdom way back in maybe freshman, sophomore year of high school. And so, yeah, like you, I was already like aware that some of these projects were a thing, but it was amusing to see like other people's like firsthand reactions to the existence of these projects, and that's always like a nice feeling to get, to hear someone else's reaction to something you enjoy yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as for the rest of your experience for during the rest of the convention.
I had a blast. I mean, when I first walked into the hotel, I was a little overwhelmed, and it was kind of surreal too, you know, because I grew up reading the fan fiction of Neil Reeby and Skip Peel, you know, Dr. Rick Summerall, and I actually shared a room with them. And I had, you know, like Skip was driving me around Chicago to the theater to go see Shin Godzilla, and it was pretty weird and pretty awesome. So had a really good time. The dealer room, I'd never been in a room with that many Godzilla toys before, you know?
Yeah.
So that was pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like being in heaven.
Well, you know what? That's the only reoccurring dream that I still have from childhood, is like going into a room full of like Godzilla toys, and it finally happened.
Aww.
Because you have to understand, like here in New Mexico, you're not going to have a store that's just full of Godzilla toys.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know, like in LA, they have things like, what's it called? Anime Jungle.
Right,
yeah,
Anime Jungle, Little Tokyo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure, like, you know, it's LA, so there's sure to be plenty of stuff that's made for, like, the geek crowd. I don't really see that kind of stuff happening. Even in San Diego, we're pretty close to the border, so it's like not so much of that like American geek culture. So I'm not sure how close Mexico is in relation to how close Roswell, New Mexico is in relation to Mexico. But I'm sure, yeah, New Mexico is not really like I'm assuming it's not that much of like one of those like safe havens for like geek culture.
No, we finally have had our Roswell Comic Con that goes on at the same time as the UFO Festival, and that's actually where I first met Don Glut. So,
okay, yeah,
he actually came to one of those. So,
right, because of course with the famous UFO crash site, I'm sure there's more of an alien culture than anything else in Roswell.
Yeah. Just in July we have the Alien Festival, and we get a lot of out of towners and people like that. So.
Let's see. For a quick side question, what is it actually like to live in Roswell, New Mexico, and how much of that incident has influenced your life?
So there's aliens or cutouts of aliens on pretty much most all of the Main Street businesses. You know, that's just the town theme, and I'd say it's been good for the town. You know, but there's not. It's like you said, there's not like a lot of weird people here, you know, weird with air quotes, you know, weird people here year round. You know, it's just in July the people come that really want to discuss the UFOs. And yeah, I've definitely had some interesting encounters with the people who come to the festival. That I don't know, that could be another podcast, but
sure, yeah, we can totally do that. Especially if you ever want to write another book about Roswell. So it's kind of like the Mothman is for Roswell.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a book. You give me a good opportunity to bring up a book I wrote, which is all about towns. It's called Roswell, USA. It's all about towns that were inspired by Roswell's success, like Point Pleasant, West Virginia, with Mothman. And you see towns that have their Bigfoot Museum, their Bigfoot Festival, their Mothman Festival, their Lake Monster Festival, and that Roswell's big success in 1997 is kind of what birthed that across the United States.
I see now. Okay, interesting. Okay, so getting back to the books, I want to know: have there ever been any copyright issues when it came to you publishing these books based off of pieces of media that you do not own personally?
No, I was very careful not to include any photographs whatsoever, because what I've basically been taught through like Steve Rifle's books and David Callett's books is you can write a nonfiction textbook on Godzilla, you couldn't do fiction on Godzilla. That would be an infringement. But if you just do a nonfiction history textbook on the films, it's not a problem. Now, let's say that I stole the Bride of Godzilla script. The Bride of Godzilla had never been published before, and then I translated it. That would probably be a problem. But the fact of the matter is, Toho published a whole book of their scripts for the public, to purchase and read. Right. And since they're out there and it's published, if you want to, look at that, critique it and paraphrase it, then it's technically a textbook.
Right.
And so from what I understand from a legal perspective is that's fine. I've seen people recently, there's a book called The Godzilla FAQ, has photographs in it, and you can tell by the way they're cited they did not work with Toho, so I definitely wonder, what's the deal with that? Has Toho changed their policy? I'm happy the book is out there, but it confuses me because it makes me think, well, if they can do it, can I do it? What's the deal here?
Maybe they were lucky enough that they flew under the radar.
Yeah, well, the Godzilla FAQ comes from like an actual major publisher. It's not like self-published.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely, That's why on the cover of the Lost Films, you'll see a giant rat, which is a nod to Dai's Nezura.
Right.
But you can't really copyright a giant rat. Anybody can have the idea. And there's been other giant rats, so,
Yeah. Like Food of the Gods comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. And okay, so that was going to be my next question, because looking through the PDF that you graciously enough gave me in advance, I noticed that there were like 0 images, despite the fact that at your panel you had plenty of images shown on the slideshow on the screen. And so I was wondering whether or not you were allowed to share pictures, those images or not, whether or not they were fan made or archived, like concept art.
Yeah, so basically what it boils down to, since you can't make any money off of your G-Fest presentation and you're just, in essence, showing people pictures, there's not any copyright issues.
Right.
Like, let's say, though, that we charged admission to this PowerPoint and people paid specifically to see the pictures, that's where Toho would have legal grounds to come in.
Right. And I wonder, would it be legally feasible to hire an artist to create depictions of these films, artistic depictions or visual depictions of these films?
I think absolutely not, from what I understand, because let's say, if you wanted to do a picture book of Godzilla, again, even though if you drew the pictures, it's still Toho's image, you know what I mean? So,
right.
Yeah.
In this case, it makes me wonder how Artist Alley has been able to get away for that long.
There's, that's kind of like a Comic-Con thing. I think it's just an unspoken rule of Comic-Cons that they know that these artists go and they draw their characters and they kind of just look the other way on purpose.
True.
I guess, but...
Yeah, I figure it's not worth the effort to go to to sue or to write a copyright, or what do you call it? Cease and desist. It would be too much of an effort on the studio's part to make a cease and desist on every single person who does this.
Yeah. And my thing with Toho is I wouldn't mind them being so aggressive if they would find a way to make content more accessible for Western fans.
Right. I mean, like Tsuburaya has been trying to do that with Ultraman. Let's see. I know Sunrise and Bandai has been trying to do that with Gundam, trying to get more of that stuff out there. I guess Toho's trying to do that more with Funimation, Godzilla, Shin Godzilla, and like we mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, a lot of the more recent DVD and Blu-ray releases. But there's still a lot of merchandise that is not available in America, I believe. I mean, there's so much reading material out there in Japan that is not available. Like since I moved to Japan, I've finally got my hands on almost all of the Heisei mangas that were adapted from the Heisei films, from 84 to Destroya. But let's see. Okay, but I guess it's like you chose like the safest path by including no pictures or any sort of visual material to work with. But in terms of the covers, who did you get to do the covers for your books?
Actually, it's a local friend of mine. First one, the guy who did the first two books, his name is Shane Olive,
Hmm.
and his son's my best friend, and his son Jared is the one who did the cover for Lost Films. So all those covers come from the same family.
Okay, that's really cool. And which one has been your favorite overall?
Oh, like favorite cover or favorite book?
Favorite cover, and then what would be your favorite book?
Probably Lost Films on both. Actually, I
Hmm.
don't know. Kind of tough. For the actual book itself, Lost Films, easy, hand down. Um, I do like the cover of Volume One for a big book of Japanese giant monster movies, though. It's very colorful.
Hmm.
To me, it's supposed to be like the plesiosaur from Legend of the Dinosaurs fighting Mighty Picking Man. That's
Oh,
who that
okay.
is in my mind. So
Right, right. Okay, because I was
yeah, and
thinking
actually,
of King
for
Kong, but
anyone who has that book,
hmm.
I do want to put in a little plug that I actually released a heavily revised and expanded second edition of that already. So it's got reviews of movies like The Whale God, Jumboard Ace and Giant,
Hmm.
Voyage into Space, The Bermuda Depth. So there is a new version of that book out there.
Hmm. Okay. And how long do you think it'll take until we eventually see a volume three of the Big Book of Monster Movies?
You know what I'll probably do? Like 5 years from now, I'll just combine both volumes into one book and just
Hmm.
call it 2022 edition. You know, that sort of thing.
Right, right.
Kind of like Leonard Maltin did his movie guide once a year.
That is true. Yeah, yeah. And technically, the Heisei era is going to end next year, so you could do like a definitive Heisei era
Yeah, that's
Big Book of
true. That's
Japanese monster
true.
movies. Yeah, yeah. Now that the Emperor decides to that he's getting too old for this.
Yeah.
Okay. And what would be it? So I think. Hmm. Oh, okay. So what has been the overall reception? What has been the reception like towards your books, and what have been some of your most memorable interactions with fans of your work?
Well, the first two volumes, which are basically just rudimentary guidebooks to the genre, I'm actually really surprised how kind the reviews have been on Amazon because most of them are positive. I didn't entirely expect that. Even though, I mean, I'm proud of the books, I'm happy with them, but I still didn't expect that positive of a response for those first two books. So I'm really pleased with that. With the Lost Films, honestly, I'm not surprised that people love it because I love it. I wrote
Hmm.
it because I wanted to read it. I wanted so bad for someone to write that book, so I just finally decided I'll go ahead and, give it my best shot. But I've been, very happy with all the reactions I've gotten to it. I've made a lot of new friends through that book, so
Hmm.
very happy.
Okay. And so let's see. As a fan of giant monsters, and as someone who has grown up with this subgenre of science fiction, where do you feel the overall direction of Japanese monster movies or overall direction of tokusatsu media is going in? Um, as in terms of like the last couple of years or even like the last decade or so, is there like a pattern that you are currently seeing right now, having looked at having taken a look at the entire history all the way back to 1954?
Okay, that's funny you bring that up because that was my first ever G-Fan article was the Godzilla cycle that goes on.
Hmm.
Because, you had Godzilla 54, a huge hit, basically huge hits throughout the 60s, and you get to the 70s and the box office dies out until finally there's basically nothing.
Hmm.
And the same thing happened from the 80s to the 2000s. You've got a fairly strong start, 1984. The 90s are very successful. Then you get to the 2000 era and it's just like the 1970s all over again.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I understand that GMK was fairly successful, but I mean, it was not successful on the level that the Heisei films were,
Hmm.
and it was partly successful just because of the Hamtaro double bill. But I mean,
Right.
those Millennium films really, their attendances were down quite a bit from the Heisei films, just like the 70s films were. So, like to me, I saw a cycle repeat itself. So right now, we're in the same boat. We just got off to a really strong start with the 2014 Godzilla and Shin Godzilla both. So I mean, I think it's going to do the same thing again, probably.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. And
Yeah.
let's see. And what are there any certain monster movies that you are looking forward to in the near future? And what are your hopes for them, or your opinions towards what you've seen so far of them?
I'm actually really happy with what Legendary plans to do. I mean, I'm a Showa guy or a Showa,
Hmm.
so I'm happy to see Godzilla and Kong as the good guys. I love the shared universe idea. You know, I think as kids we have idealized versions of the movies that we want to see, and we're probably never going to see those. And I just kind of came to accept that. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? But the Legendary universe, I'm pretty excited for. You know, I mean, it's not exactly what I want, but I'm happy with it. And you
Hmm.
know, Shin Godzilla was really different, really weird. I know it was very polarizing, but I thought it was pretty cool overall. You know, I mean, it got Godzilla back in the public eye in Japan. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing that it won for Best Picture and that its grosses were that high. So, I mean, I
Oh
would
yeah,
say even if you
definitely.
didn't, yeah, even if you didn't like that movie, you should be
Hmm.
thankful because it's gonna ensure that the merchandising goes on.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Ever since Shin Godzilla came out, there has been I have seen a larger presence of Godzilla here in Gifu, just from my own experiences living here in Japan. I mean, before Shin Godzilla came out, pretty much people were aware of Godzilla here, but they were clearly never fans or any. They were not people who ever
Yeah.
saw a single Godzilla movie in their lives. I mean, I have some. I because I work as a conversational English teacher here. I have certain students from elementary school, middle school, high school who have never seen a Godzilla movie in their
Hmm.
lives. So these are we have like an entire generation or two of people of Japanese people detached from Godzilla. And so Shin Godzilla was probably their first exposure. And considering how much Japan in general loved the movie and its close ties to recent events in Japanese history, specifically like the Tohoku earthquake and not the 311 tsunami and earthquake incident.
Hmm.
It really struck a chord with them just as much as it seemed that 54 had an effect on the people on the generation that survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in a way, it's kind of like history repeating itself again. And it's very interesting to see that firsthand living in Japan. But anyways, this is not about me. This is about you. So I'm very sorry about that. So to
No,
wrap things.
I enjoy hearing your perspective actually living in Japan, so I think that's great.
Oh, thank you very much then. So for my final question, is there any advice you'd like to give to people who are interested in getting into the publishing business or who want to write books, be it fictional or non-fictional, and they want to contribute to the Tokusatsu Godzilla Kaiju giant monster fan base as you have yourself?
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, if you want to write a book about Godzilla, I'd say go for it and self-publish it. Just be smart, you know, like we talked about. Don't put pictures in it. Don't, you know, do fiction, do nonfiction. You'll probably be okay.
Hmm.
You know, because it's very marketable. Like I said, there's a void for Godzilla merchandise here, you know, so people are searching Godzilla on Amazon and they find my books and other people's books and, you know, they buy them. So, you know, and again, if you want to do, you know, fiction, like I said, try for a real publisher first. I just use self-publishing as a last-ditch effort on that one. But and if you're into history, the good news is the history press is really easy to break into. So if you have some historical nonfiction you want to write, just look up the history press. You know, like I said, very easy to break into. So that would be my advice, you know, in a nutshell.
Okay, very good. And so, since we are heading to the end of another episode of the Shuwatch podcast, where can people find you, good sir?
You know, I don't really have an official website, but I mean, if you want to track me down on Facebook Monsterland, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Hmm. And in that case, where can people find your all of your books?
All of them are on Amazon.com.
Okay, excellent. And so, thank you very much, John, for being a part of this episode. It's been a pleasure getting the chance to interact with you, to discuss all kinds of Japanese monster history, facts, and trivia. And if you ever want to be on the podcast again, just let me know, especially if you have another book coming out soon.
Absolutely. Hey, even maybe without a book, just anytime.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, totally. You can just shoot the shit, do whatever you want, do whatever we want, because it's that's the beauty of freeform conversational podcast. So yes, you can specify if you are interested in John LeMay's tokusatsu books. You can definitely check them out on Amazon. You can check out the Big Book of Japanese Giant Monster Movies, Volume 1, 1954 to 1982, as well as Volume 2, and his recent book from this year, The Big Book of Japanese Monster Movies, The Lost Films. So, for this episode of the Shuwatch podcast, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and you have been...
John LeMay. I thought you were talking to the listeners. I got confused for a second.
I guess I was kind of doing.
You caught me off guard.
Sorry, I was kind of doing a bit of both here.
Yeah.
I will work on that in the future. I will let my guests know in advance what I'm about to do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andres. I had a great time, though. Like I said, so be happy to come back anytime.
Excellent. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care.